The story begins with a team of explorers on a ship in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean. On that ship was a weather officer named David, whose job was to monitor and report the weather. They were heading toward an island located right in the heart of the ocean. The government had sent David there to observe and record the island's ever-changing weather patterns. He was expected to stay on the island for nearly a full year, collecting weather data every single day, and only after completing 1 year would he return. David had been given a full year's supply of food and all the essential items he would need. After many days of sailing, they finally reached the island. The team disembarked using a small boat. The island was completely desolate. Not even a single bird could be seen anywhere. On the island stood a lighthouse and a small house where David was supposed to live. A previous weather officer named Robert had lived there before him, but his 1-year duty had now ended. Robert had spent an entire year alone on the island collecting weather data, and now David would take his place for the next year while Robert returned with the ship. However, when the entire team went to inspect the house, they were shocked. There was no trace of any human being inside. The previous officer's belongings were scattered everywhere. The captain and David then thought that perhaps someone might be in the lighthouse. Without wasting any time, the captain and David headed toward the lighthouse. And what they saw there was bizarre. The entire lighthouse was surrounded by sharp, pointed wooden stakes, as if someone had deliberately sealed it shut so no one could enter. The captain and David knocked on the lighthouse door several times, but there was no response from inside. Finally, they forced the door open and went in. Inside the lighthouse, they found a man named Gruner. When they asked Gruner about the previous weather officer, Robert, he replied that Robert was dead. He had gone toward the sea but never returned. Hearing this, both David and the captain were stunned. After listening to everything, the captain told David, "If you want, you can still come back with us right now." But David refused to leave. He thought that if he managed to provide the government with accurate weather reports from this island, he would earn a huge sum of money. The captain then handed David a gun for his own protection and said, "This place doesn't feel safe to me. Take care of yourself." After leaving him there, the team departed, and they would return only after 1 year. After the captain left, David tidied up the house a little and made it livable. That night, while looking around, he found a diary in a drawer. It belonged to the previous weather officer, Robert. The diary contained a lot of information about the island. There were mentions of a mysterious creature, but nothing was clear. Many things were incomplete. David read every line carefully. The diary also contained strange sketches of some kind of animals. David couldn't understand why Robert had drawn such pictures. Perhaps he was lonely and had done it to pass the time. On one page of the diary was a photograph of the previous officer's wife. David grew tired while reading the diary and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, he began collecting weather data, but as soon as he reached the seashore, his feet froze. He noticed that some stones near the rocks had been arranged in a strange pattern, with seashells placed among them. Thinking that Gruner must have done it, David went back to his work. While working, when he looked toward the lighthouse through binoculars, he saw another person standing next to Gruner, but in the blink of an eye, that figure vanished. David tried to look again, but he thought it must have been his imagination. That night, David was busy with his work when there was a knock at the door. He thought it was Gruner. David called out his name, but there was no answer. Holding a lamp, as soon as David walked toward the door, strange sounds, not human at all, started echoing in his ears. Then he saw a bizarre creature's hand trying to reach inside from under the door. It was definitely not a human hand. Seeing this, the ground slipped from under David's feet. He immediately ran to the basement and hid there. Within moments, that mysterious creature had entered the house. It was sneaking around, searching for David. David started watching it through a small crack in the basement. Because of a slight movement David made, the creature spotted him. It charged toward him to kill him and tried to grab him through the crack. To save himself, David quickly picked up a knife and stabbed it straight in the eye. The creature screamed and fled, but it could return anytime. And now David was certain that whatever was written in the diary about the creature was true. Out of fear, he couldn't sleep the entire night. The next morning, when David stepped outside, he saw footprints in the sand that were definitely not human. Those prints led straight to the sea and disappeared. Now David understood why Gruner had surrounded the lighthouse with sharp wooden stakes. He realized that if he stayed in this house, the creature could kill him any time. Terrified, David ran toward the lighthouse, shouting for Gruner to open the door and let him in. But Gruner refused to let him inside and said, "You should have left with the ship." Disheartened, David turned back. Gruner didn't even want him near the lighthouse. He poured water on him from above and told him to stay away. Now David had to do something himself. He boarded up every window of the house with wood, surrounded the entire place with sharp stakes, and placed old papers and books outside the door. He poured oil over them so that if the creature returned, he could scare it away with fire. But there was one thing David still didn't know, and he would find out tonight. Luckily, he found an old box inside the house that contained a gun and plenty of bullets. Seeing this gave him a slight hope of survival. As the sun began to set, Fear grew in David's heart. Soon, darkness enveloped everything. Holding the gun, David sat quietly in one corner of the house. His heartbeat was racing. Then he heard a strange sound. When he secretly looked toward the sea through the window, it felt as though the ground had vanished beneath him. He saw not one, but many of those same bizarre creatures emerging from the water and heading straight toward him. Within moments, they gathered and started trying to break down the door. David immediately began firing. Some of the creatures fell and died. He thought that after hearing the gunshots, they would get scared and run away. But seeing their companions dying only made them angrier. Then David executed another part of his plan. He set fire to the papers and old books placed outside the door. Seeing the flames, the creatures fled back into the sea out of fear. But now, the same fire had reached David's house. The wooden door caught fire, and the flames began spreading rapidly since the entire house was made of wood. David quickly wrapped himself in a blanket, saved his life, and escaped outside. He hid behind a large rock near the lighthouse. While shooting the creatures, David had also suffered a deep injury to his hand. Suddenly, heavy rain began pouring down. The fire slowly started dying out, but even after the whole night's rain, by morning, David couldn't save his house. The entire house had burned down and turned almost to ashes. Now, if David wanted to stay alive, he had to take shelter in the lighthouse. He picked up his rifle, hid among the rocks near the lighthouse, and waited for Gruner to come out to fetch water. When Gruner stepped out of the lighthouse to get water, David quietly followed him. But suddenly, a strange creature that was with Gruner attacked David. Somehow, David managed to overpower it. That creature was Gruner's protector. Just as David was about to shoot it, Gruner immediately stopped him and said, "Stop, this is my pet." David didn't fire. Seizing the moment, he made a deal with Gruner. "If you want this creature to live, let me stay in the lighthouse. Otherwise, I'll kill it." Gruner agreed because David had plenty of food and gunpowder. Before evening, both of them returned to the lighthouse with the remaining food and slept peacefully. The next morning, the creature was quietly licking David's hand. When David woke up, he saw that because of the creature's licking, his injured hand had completely healed. David was astonished. Now he wanted to learn more from Gruner about this creature and reveal everything to the world, because this was nothing less than magic. David thought that if they revealed the secret of this creature to the world, both he and Gruner would earn a lot of money and fame. But Gruner didn't want any of that. He didn't want to leave the island. He had no one left in the world. For him, this island was perfect. He considered himself a king here, the master of his own will. That's why he had written in many places on the island, "Gruner is the king here." But David couldn't understand how this strange creature had become Gruner's pet. Gruner explained that once, by mistake, the creature had gotten caught in his fishing net when she was small. He had saved her life that day, and since then she had stayed with him and obeyed his every command. However, Gruner was a cruel man. He treated the creature very badly. Every day, Gruner had physical relations with the creature. Gruner said that once the creature had attacked him, and in return, he punished her so severely that afterward she began considering herself his slave. And now you all understand why those creatures come out of the sea every night. They come to rescue their companion from Gruner and take her back, but Gruner never lets that happen. The creatures cannot attack during daylight because sunlight burns their skin. David no longer wanted to stay here. He desperately wanted to escape the island somehow. Evening came, and Gruner told him to get ready with the gun because the creatures could attack at any moment. They prepared to turn on the lighthouse light, and soon a large number of creatures emerged from the sea and started heading toward the lighthouse. Gruner kept firing at them continuously, but David was completely terrified. Despite Gruner telling him again and again, David just sat quietly in a corner inside the lighthouse and soon passed out. Gruner fought the creatures alone all night. The next morning, in anger, he splashed water on David's face to wake him and said, "If you want to stay alive, you'll have to take their lives. Otherwise, I'll throw you out of the lighthouse, and you'll have to obey my every command. Fetch water daily, do all the small and big jobs in the lighthouse, and stand guard with me at night." Now David had no other choice. It became his compulsion to do all this. He started obeying Gruner's every order, but there was one thing he absolutely hated. Every day, Gruner physically tortured the female creature in different ways. Night fell again. Both prepared for guard duty once more, and the creatures emerged from the sea again. But this time, David was not afraid. He started firing at the creatures. However, today, Gruner did nothing. He left David outside, locked the lighthouse door, and sat quietly inside so that David would learn on his own how to fight these creatures. In this way, David kept fighting, and the night passed. By morning, Gruner saw David sitting outside the lighthouse door, covered in blood. Now he had learned how to fight the creatures. Time passed like this, fighting the creatures at night and handling lighthouse chores for Gruner during the day. The island had now become like a prison for David. He constantly thought about when he would leave this place and breathe the air of freedom again. Over time, a strange friendship developed between David and the female creature. David started feeling bad for her. He now understood how difficult it is to live alone, away from one's own people. Perhaps the creature felt the same. David even gave her a name, Anaris. Days continued like this, and then one day they noticed that the creature's attacks were gradually decreasing. David thought maybe they migrated somewhere else during winter, or perhaps they had realized that fighting these two men would yield nothing. But Gruner told him that was not the case. They would attack again. Right now, they were increasing their numbers. A few more days passed like this. One night after dinner, Gruner and David started playing chess to pass the time. But here, Gruner made a big mistake. They became so engrossed in the game that they forgot to turn on the lighthouse light. Taking advantage of the darkness, the creatures attacked. David saw that their numbers were so huge that even two men together couldn't fight for long, and this time they had no plan. Their bullets were also almost finished. Somehow saving themselves, they reached the top of the lighthouse. But during this, Gruner suffered a deep injury to his leg. The creatures were overpowering them today. Both thought that this was surely their last day. But fortunately, morning arrived. As the sun slowly rose, the creatures left the lighthouse and returned to the sea. After the harsh sunlight came out, Anaris tried to heal Gruner's wound, but by now, David had understood that they could not win this fight against the creatures. Their bullets were nearly finished. They didn't have enough food to last much longer. Luckily, the next day, while walking around outside the lighthouse, David spotted a ship in the sea. He quickly went inside, grabbed the flare gun, and ran to signal the ship. But Gruner stopped him because he didn't want David to leave. At that very moment, Anaris attacked Gruner. She wanted to save David from him. Gruner didn't want anyone to leave the island. This island was his own world where he lived like a king. He didn't want David to leave either. After being alone for so long, he finally had someone to talk to. And if David left on that ship, he would tell the world about Anaris and the creatures, so David could not leave now. Slowly, the ship disappeared from David's sight into the sea. Now, he had nothing left to do. A few more days passed like this. Gruner continued mistreating both David and Anaris, but he especially beat Anaris, which David hated. One day, David gifted Anaris a small toy boat he had made from fish bones. When Anaris saw the toy boat, she took David to a corner of the island where a real boat was actually hidden. When David asked Gruner about it, he admitted he had known all along that a boat was there in that part of the island. Some people had once come to the island in that boat to save their lives, but before morning, none of them survived. The creatures had killed them all. They had been carrying ammunition on the ship, but due to a storm at sea, their ship sank near this island. Hearing this, an idea struck David. They had something like a diving suit. David said that if one of them wore the suit and went underwater to the place where the ship sank, they might find bullets or dynamite that would make fighting the creatures easier. But Gruner refused. Still, David was ready to risk his life for it. A few more days passed. A deep connection had formed between David and Anaris. David had started to like her. Gruner secretly saw the two of them being romantic. He felt that Anaris would be taken away from him, so he had to get David out of the way. The next day, Gruner suddenly agreed to David's plan. He told David, "Fine, you wear the suit and go underwater, collect a lot of RDX, and I'll pull you up with the rope." But Gruner's real intention was different. He wanted David to bring the dynamite boxes from the bottom of the sea to the surface with his help, and then leave him alone in the water so the creatures would kill him. That way, he would get the dynamite, and Anaris would become his slave again. Both of them took the boat and reached the spot where the ship had sunk. David put on the diving suit and went underwater. Down below, he saw that the ship was completely destroyed, but his luck was good. He found some boxes of dynamite. Suddenly, some creatures appeared in front of him. Seeing them, David panicked and fell. The diving suit was so heavy that he couldn't even move, and he couldn't signal Gruner either. Gruner thought the creatures had probably killed David, but in reality, they were just two small young ones. Somehow, David left the diving suit there and managed to reach the surface on his own. He found some old boxes containing dynamite. After that, both of them got to work. They laid dynamite in 2 layers around the lighthouse so that in the next attack, they could finish off the monsters in one go. Several months passed, and winter arrived with snowfall, but once again the creatures suddenly disappeared. The attacks had completely stopped. It was as if the creatures had somehow learned that a trap had been set for them. That's why they were no longer attacking. Gruner thought Anaris must have warned them, so he started torturing her even more, but David stopped him. Finally, both of them made a new plan, to leave the main gate of the lighthouse open so that as soon as the creatures came near, they could blow them all up with the dynamite. David cleverly told Anaris to scream from the top of the lighthouse. As soon as the creatures heard Anaris's voice, they became enraged. When they saw the main gate open, they thought it was a good opportunity to rescue Anaris, but in reality, it was a trap. Soon, the creatures started coming out of the sea. They headed straight for the main gate and attacked David as soon as they entered. David also showed courage and escaped from the creature. As soon as all the creatures reached near the lighthouse, Gruner pressed the detonator lever, but there was no explosion. Actually, David had disconnected the wire earlier, and Gruner had forgotten to reconnect it. David immediately ran upstairs and started reconnecting the wire. Meanwhile, the creatures were trying to climb the lighthouse, and only Gruner was holding them back. As soon as the connection was complete, David triggered the first layer. Many creatures were killed in the blast, but many monsters were still ready to attack the lighthouse. So Gruner triggered the second layer as well. Both of them fainted from the massive explosion. The next morning, when they regained consciousness, they saw that Anarus was not there. Dead creatures lay all around from the blast. Gruner was killing the ones that were still alive but injured. Then David's eyes fell on a necklace hanging around the neck of one of the creatures. Seeing that creature writhing in pain, David felt pity and realized his mistake. The creatures he had considered bloodthirsty until now were just like humans. They just couldn't speak. But for Gruner, all this was nonsense. After that day, the creatures never attacked again. But every day, cries could be heard from the seashore. David still didn't know how much damage they had caused, how many families had been shattered, how many children had lost their loved ones, just because of one misunderstanding. The next day, David saw some small creature children in the sea who had lost their families. David made a circular arrangement of stones and placed the small toy boat in the middle so that Anarus would see it and return. David waited for many hours, but Anarus never came back. The next morning, when David woke up, he saw Gruner sleeping. Some old things were lying near Gruner, including an old photograph. As soon as David saw the photo, he was stunned. The girl whose picture he had seen on the first day in the previous Officer Robert's diary was none other than Gruner's wife, and Gruner was standing with her in the photo. In reality, the weather officer Robert, who came a year ago, had not died. He had simply changed his identity. That is, Gruner was actually the weather officer Robert. He had just changed his name because he no longer wanted to leave this island ever again. Seeing all this, David also gave up hope that he would ever be able to leave the island. The next evening, when David went to the seashore, he saw that the small toy boat he had placed in the circle was no longer there. But in its place, he saw a small creature child holding that boat. David threw the burning stick he was holding into the middle of the circle to show that he had no intention of fighting and that no one should feel threatened. He wanted to be friends with them. A little later, Anarus emerged from the sea waves, and behind her, the entire group of creatures also came out of the water. But this time, none of them attacked David because they too now wanted peace. Their only desire was a safe place for their children. But then Gruner arrived holding a gun. He felt that if peace was established, how would he feel superior? David tried to explain to him that the creatures didn't want to fight. They wanted peace. But Gruner listened to no one. He shouted at Anarus to go inside. But for the first time, Anarus did not obey him because she was no longer his servant. Seeing this, Gruner felt that his kingship on the island was over. He began feeling weak inside because now no one was following his orders. In anger, he started walking toward the lighthouse. David thought that perhaps Gruner had finally understood that every living being wants freedom. No one wants to live as a slave. But the obsession with being king was not going to leave Gruner's mind so easily. As soon as he reached the lighthouse, he fired a flare from the signal gun that went straight and hit one of the creature children. The child died instantly. All the creatures fled in fear, and Anarus completely lost her trust in David. Enraged, David ran toward the lighthouse to teach Gruner a lesson. He started fighting him. "Why did you do this? They just wanted peace." But Gruner had become so violent that he decided to kill David. Just as he raised an iron rod to strike David, David called him by his real name and said, "Stop, Robert. You are not a murderer." Hearing this, Gruner suddenly stopped. In reality, Robert had never been this kind of person. After coming to this island and living alone, his mental health had deteriorated. Loneliness, the death of his wife, and deep depression had turned him into this. He was never actually a killer. He was a good man. Gruner realized that the creatures never wanted to fight. They only wanted peace. He had killed them only to feel powerful. Now Gruner realized his mistake, so he surrendered himself to the creatures, and within moments they killed him. David locked himself inside the lighthouse. Time passed like this, and 1 year later, a government officer arrived on the island along with a new weather officer. Now the new officer had to monitor the weather on the island. When the captain asked David about the previous officer, David repeated the same thing. He went toward the water, but never came back. And the new weather officer also thought that David was Gruner. David did not correct their misunderstanding. He quietly went to the balcony and stood there without saying anything, because now he too no longer wanted to leave the island, just like Gruner. Meanwhile, Anarus was happy with her family. Now they no longer had to fear someone like Gruner. They could live freely both on the island and in the sea. And with this, the story ends.